think we'll go ahead and get started. Good afternoon, and welcome to today's seminar, which is offered as a part of CTS's Fall Transportation Seminar Series. My name is Linda Prisen, and I'm the Research Administration Director at CTS. And this seminar series is offered by CTS and the ITS Institute, which is housed at CTS. And it'll be one seminar each week, each Thursday afternoon, same time, 3:30 to 4:30 here in this room. And it will feature transportation topics on a variety of different areas. And the seminar is today being held in conjunction with the CTS Transportation Planning and the Environment Council meeting. A schedule of upcoming seminars can be found on the CTS website, and we also do email announcements as each seminar is drawing closer so that you'll have that information in case you want to attend future seminars. Just a couple of housekeeping items. Today's seminar is being streamed live on the CTS website, and a recorded copy of the seminar will be available upon the conclusion of the seminar. It usually takes a day or so to get that posted. So if you know of somebody who wasn't able to be here today, you might want to pass along that information to them. It will be available for viewing later. And we'd ask that you please hold all of your questions until the end of the seminar. We will have an opportunity for those in a remote audience on the web to type in their questions. And you'll notice that this microphone isn't projecting in the room, but it is projecting to the audience that's joining us on the web. So if you have a question, Joe will come around at the end with the microphone, and be sure to you speak into this even though it's not projecting. I think that's it. And at this point in time, I'd like to announce or introduce the council chair for the Planning and Environment Council. And it's Connie Kozlak from the Met Council, and she is going to introduce today's speaker. I did. Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Linda. Today we have Carissa Schively Slotterback, who is an assistant professor in urban and regional planning at the Humphrey School of Public Affairs, and she is also a resident fellow in the Institute on the Environment at the University of Minnesota. She is going to be talking to us today on developing a model framework for regional sustainability planning and implementation. She focuses much in that area. Her research and teaching are focused on public involvement and decision-making in environmental, land use, and transportation planning, with a particular emphasis on collaboration and environmental impact assessment. She has also worked as a planner in both the public and private sectors, and she is a member of the American Institute of Certified Planners. She has a PhD in urban and regional planning from Florida State, and a master's in the same topic from Clemson University. So Carissa, if you want to go ahead, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. I have my own. Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. I've did this presentation at the APA, or a version of this presentation at the APA Minnesota conference, but I don't think there's any overlap. So if there is, I apologize. Some of the slides are similar, but I've added some more content for this. So thanks for being here. I'm happy to talk about some research that I've been engaged in over the last year or so. So what I've been doing, and I've been assisted heartily by a couple of research assistants who I want to acknowledge first, Lissa Leitner and Andrea Long, both who've now graduated but were really instrumental in helping with this work. What we were doing is looking at approaches for planning and implementing sustainability at a regional scale. So looking at how we apply this concept of sustainability in a regional context with the intent of informing what we're calling a model framework for regional sustainability planning and implementation. A framework, a way of thinking about and sort of conceptualizing lessons that we're learning from a variety of cases into a framework that could be used to inform other regions who are interested in sustainability planning and implementation. So what we're interested in doing is creating something that could be used by organizations, by stakeholders who want to do regional sustainability planning in their own context, or that are maybe interested in evaluating sustainability planning efforts or implementation, with the intent of producing something that's adaptable, that could be used in a variety of regional contexts, from more rural to something more metropolitan or urban like the Twin Cities context, as well as something that could be used around the U.S., not just specific to the Minnesota context. So what we've tried to do, and I'll talk about the cases in a moment, is draw lessons from a variety of contexts so that we can inform ourselves about what might be an adaptable framework to fit into a variety of contexts and be appropriate and of interest to a variety of users. So what we looked at in sort of coming to the idea of this research and determining what we wanted to focus on, there's a number of things that are happening right now, and I think many of you in the room are aware of them. One of the things that's happening around sustainability is we have this sort of unprecedented alignment of resources, people, and interest at the federal level around sustainability. So HUD, DOT, EPA coming together with a fair amount of money actually to promote sustainability through the Sustainable Communities Partnership, and just also sort of leadership and recognition at the federal level of the importance of work around sustainability planning. That resulted in a series of Sustainable Communities grants, one of which went to the Twin Cities Metropolitan Council. We also have a grant that went to Region 5. So we have kind of the effects of this federal partnership happening in Minnesota. So that's in the context as well. We also have a Living Cities grant, which came through a variety of foundations to the Twin Cities that's interested in these same issues. The Twin Cities Met Council work in Living Cities fits into the corridors of opportunity, if you're familiar with that. So lots of activity, both federal, state, local, around sustainability. McKnight Foundation had done some work on regional sustainability indicators in the past few years. A number of communities and some state agencies are thinking about how sustainability fits into their specific context. So again, lots of momentum, I think, emerging. And what we wanted to do with this research is respond to that, provide information, provide some insights from a variety of other communities and regions that are doing sustainability planning, and see what we might be able to glean from them to inform work that's happening here and inform the practice broadly around sustainability planning. Received, fortunately, funding from the Center for Transportation Research, or Center for Transportation Studies, who saw, again, the same need for greater capacity, increasing interest, increasing research around sustainability. So a lot of pieces sort of coming together that we're responding to in this context. So another piece that we see, and kind of looking across the cases that we looked at and just sort of drawing generally on the bit of research that had been done in the past on regional sustainability planning, is what we're really seeing is that regions are using sustainability as a way to reframe collaboration with local governments and stakeholders. So what I mean by that is, in many cases, these regions that we're looking at are taking on sustainability as a way of sort of reframing things that they're already doing. So they may be regions that are metropolitan planning organizations. In many cases, these plans are coming out of regions that have some governance capacity. They've been around for a long time, and they're now shifting their focus to sustainability. They're reorganizing plans that they've been doing in the past, rethinking it, sort of reframing around sustainability. And one of the things that we're seeing come out of this, and we'll talk about some specific examples, is it's reshaping the way that they're doing engagement. So they're seeing the need for broader engagement, broader outreach to local governments and to stakeholders as a part of this. One, because it's a new topic, but also because sustainability really requires that, and they're starting to see that. One of the things that we're also seeing across these cases, and this is just a preview of the findings, is that they're seeing regional sustainability plans as a framework for local implementation. So thinking beyond what can happen within a regional agency or a regional organization to the ways that stakeholders and local governments and other entities can help support goals that are established at a regional scale. So just a few kind of quick highlights. A couple of the other things that we're seeing is that these plans are making connections across systems, maybe in a way that's more extensive than had been done in the past. So often regional plans are sort of organized the way you would see a local comprehensive plan. You'll have a land use section, a transportation section, maybe a housing, maybe a couple of other sections. What you're seeing here is greater connections across those systems and really thinking about how they intersect with each other in a more explicit way than had been done in the past. Not completely in all cases, but I think more recognition of the kind of interconnections across systems. Secondly, I think there's growing sort of recognition of the need to draw on local priorities and expertise, sort of realizing the limitations of regional government. In many cases, regional organizations don't have any power at all. In some cases, they have carrots, funding, things like that. But the need, are sort of recognizing the need to draw on other local resources, stakeholders, and expertise in order to advance regional interests. And then third, I think we're really seeing a lot of enhancement in terms of engagement efforts happening as well. And so what I've put in at the bottom is just the kind of range of topics that we're seeing integrated under sustainability in the plans that we're looking at. So not just transportation and land use and natural resources, but you're seeing some other pieces come in, like infrastructure, like economic development, energy, food, education, governance, so sort of expanding the range of topics that might be covered in your sort of traditional regional plan. So again, just a preview. So what we did in the research is a case study analysis, and in this case we looked at 7 cases, 5 in the U.S., 2 international, to give us a broad perspective on what's happening in regional sustainability planning around sustainability, or regional planning around sustainability. And we did 3 things. One was we looked at the content of those regional sustainability plans. What is in the plans? How is sustainability being conceptualized? How are they organized? Second, we looked at the processes used to develop the plans. Who was engaged in those processes? How did they reach out to local governments, elected officials, stakeholders who might have particular expertise? Then we looked at approaches to implementation and monitoring. So how are they moving forward from planning to actually accomplishing projects and doing monitoring to measure the effects of plan implementation? Again, we tried to draw on as diverse a set of cases as possible, drawing on different organizational contexts, different types of regional organizations, different geographies, different sustainability issues, and different planning issues. Essentially what we found in trying to identify our cases, and I'll show you the list in a minute, is that there really weren't that many regions that had actually done regional sustainability planning. Now we have 45 or more that have been funded to do regional sustainability planning under the Sustainable Communities grants. But at the time we started this research, which was a little bit over a year ago, there weren't that many regions that had actually done this. So we were sort of capturing the state of practice before the carrot of federal funding came through to these regions, and really looking at regions who took the initiative sort of on their own to conduct regional sustainability plans. So in order to do the work and do the analysis that I talked about on the last page, we reviewed planning documents, we collected the full documents, reviewed them in great detail, we interviewed key participants, we talked to planning staff, transportation engineering staff, we talked to elected officials, we talked to other stakeholder groups who had a role in these different processes to capture a wide range of perspectives on what happened in the case. And we had the benefit of collaborating with a research advisory group who was really helpful in ensuring that we were asking the right questions to inform what would happen in practice. So we worked with a variety of organizations as part of that. We've met 4 times so far. We'll reconvene this fall. But a variety of nonprofit organizations like Alliance for Metropolitan Sustainability, Minnesota Center for Environmental Advocacy, thank you Jim Urkel for being here, other governmental organizations, Watershed Management Organization, MWMO, University of Minnesota Regional Sustainable Development Partnerships, Urban Land Institute, Met Council, a few state agencies including MnDOT were involved. So we got a range of perspectives on what would be useful in terms of this research, and they really helped us sort of sort through some of the findings as well and have given us some good advice on how to package it to make it relevant to practitioners. So the cases we ultimately settled on are listed here. The 2 international ones show up at the top. One from Victoria, British Columbia, another from Sydney, Australia, and then 5 from the U.S. So we have a few of the Metropolitan Planning and Organization plans. We have Delaware Valley Regional Planning Council out of Philadelphia, Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning and their Go-To 2040 plan, and Denver Regional Council of Governments, or DRCOG. We have St. Cloud Joint Planning District, which actually has a regional sustainability plan. This is a different kind of regional organization. And then, Long Island Regional Planning Council, which is not an MPO as well. It's a 2-county organization that encompasses 200 or so municipalities and lower levels of government. So a sort of diverse set of cases, but capturing 3 MPOs, and I think there's some good comparisons that you can make across those relative to the other regional organizations that we're looking at. So I'm going to highlight a few of the key findings that we've come up with in 3 areas. One is plan content, one is plan process, and then last, plan implementation and monitoring. I'm going to highlight the basic findings, and then I'll point to a few examples from the specific cases. So one of the things that we're seeing in terms of plan content is that these plans are defining sustainability quite broadly. Some of them are referring to sort of the traditional definition of sustainability that comes from the Brundtland Commission, which is sort of, what is the definition? Ensuring that there are sufficient resources available for future generations, essentially. Some of them are referring to that. Some of them are defining it in a more context-specific way. They're talking about parameters for sustainability. So I think an essential finding here is that in almost all of these regions, they made a specific effort to define sustainability relative to that context, and they really took the time to have some conversations about what sustainability means in that particular place within that particular regional organization. So I think that's significant. Each of the plans is organized based on issues and themes. Most of the MPO plans are organized around those sort of traditional organizational elements of land use and transportation, but they are making more connections across them than you might see. Some of the other plans are integrating different issues and themes than you might think about. So Long Island, for example, focuses on governance and education. Those are two pieces that you don't really often think about at the regional scale. I'll talk more about that in a minute. Another thing that we're seeing is that they're looking at issues that are beyond the jurisdiction of the regional entity. So we have the Metropolitan Council in the Twin Cities region. They have a certain number of things that they have authority over. And most would argue that they probably have more authority than most other regional organizations across the country. So in some cases, again, they have no authority at all. So they're thinking about how they can draw on other jurisdictions, other authorities, other policies in order to advance sustainability within a regional context beyond what the regional entity preparing the plan actually has jurisdiction over. And I think that's significant and a bit different than some of the regional plans that have been prepared in the past. Another thing that we're seeing is that they're making an effort to document participation in the plan. So I'll talk in a minute about ways that they've been doing participation, but there seems to be an effort to talk in the plan about the participation and engagement and outreach that was done, documenting it, ensuring, sort of expressing how the content arose and that it was significantly informed by participation. I think that's important as well. And in some cases, we're seeing them create short and long versions of the plan. So one of the challenges we have with regional plans is they're often very long, and that can make them very inaccessible to some participants or some folks who might otherwise be interested. So they're preparing longer versions in the 100 or so more page range, the stuff we're all familiar with, and creating short, sort of 20, 25 page, more glossy versions with big images, simple to understand graphics, something that's just more attractive and more digestible to a broader audience. So those are some interesting things. A couple of specific findings from a couple of the cases. Long Island Regional Planning Council. I mentioned before that the MPOs tended to focus on your sort of traditional categories or themes in the plans. Long Island added economy and taxes and governance. One of the key concerns that they had there, and I talked with a wide range of folks, is concerns about a sustainable economy. This area has been hit really hard by the recession. There are declines in land values. There's a lot of disparity within the area, very high income areas and very low income areas. Lots of segregation challenges. This is one of the most segregated areas of the country, and they've been suffering with that for a long time. They have multiple levels of government. They have this regional government, which has actually gone away now. It's been defunded by the two counties. But many, many lower levels of government, not just municipalities, but hamlets and special districts and towns, all sort of below the municipality level, that really challenges them to deliver services, infrastructure in an efficient way. And they really saw this governance piece and taxes and governance and economy as really essential to moving them forward on sustainability before they could even get a handle on a lot of the other stuff. So they had that conversation and realized this is what it was going to take to get them to sustainability. So something a little bit different in this case. This is a regional organization that had no authority at all. So what they focused on in organizing their plan is offering a set of strategies that they could advance sort of as a regional organization or provide information about, but strategies that could be adopted and undertaken by other organizations, lower levels of government, for example. St. Cloud Joint Planning District also took a similar approach in terms of organizing. This is another regional entity that doesn't have any authority, essentially, and they took more of a toolkit or sort of strategy approach, where they put information out and resources out related to a number of implementation areas, or what they call best practice areas. So the way they organized their plan was around a series of, I think it was 17 best practice areas, where they described what the best practice was and they put forth a set of tools or ideas about how that might be accomplished. Not so much by the region, but by entities within that region. So they had strategies in the area of greenhouse gas reduction, sustainable land use policies, surface and groundwater, community health, sustainability education, and the list goes on. So I think an interesting approach, and maybe reflects a bit of a different organization and a different positioning than you see from some of the other plans. The Metropolitan Plan for Sydney, this is an international context, so it's a little bit different. This is a state-initiated plan for the region. So you can imagine the state coming in and saying, well, region, this is your plan. We're doing it for you. We insist that this is your plan. So the state, in this case, initiated the plan, but worked with the broader region, including these 41 local governments, to develop this plan. One of the key areas of focus, I think, and this sort of reflects the sustainability perspective, is that they focused on creating a city of cities. So emphasizing kind of nodes within this broader sort of urban metropolitan area. So their vision is by 2036, Sydney will become a more compact, networked city with improved accessibility, capable of supporting more jobs, homes, and lifestyle opportunities within the existing urban footprint. So you see some ideas of growth management in there. You see some ideas of sustainable economy in there. You see sort of compact, networked, sort of reminiscent of smart growth. And you see that put in this kind of sustainability context. So they have a number of strategic directions and things like growing and renewing centers, transport for a connected city, balancing land uses on the fringe, tackling climate change, something that you don't see in any of the U.S. plans, protecting the environment, achieving equity, livability, and social inclusion. Again, that's another term we're not really seeing in the U.S. plans. So I put this up here just because it's a little bit different. Some of the language is different. You can see that they're kind of organizing their ideas around sustainability in a little bit different way, and they're kind of wrapping them within what we might think of as a growth management context, sort of recognizing the limits of urbanization and seeing the limits on that as essential to sustainability. So in terms of planning process, a number of best practices emerging as well. One of them is, as I alluded to before, is just engaging multiple stakeholders. So there seems to be efforts above and beyond what you typically see in a regional plan happening around sustainability, or in this context of regional sustainability planning. And efforts to reach out not to sort of general public, holding public meetings, but things that are more targeted. So outreach to the private sector. Working through existing networks, organizing participation around key topic areas. We know it's really challenging to get people involved in long-range planning. It's challenging to get people involved in regional planning. People don't have a clear stake, so they're not likely to show up at a meeting, for example, if they don't have a clear stake. If it's not something that's being built tomorrow in their backyard, it's hard to get them there. So one of the things that we're seeing, and this shows up in the third item here, is that they're organizing participation around issue-specific work groups. So identifying key issues that are relevant to the regional sustainability plan, like education, like transportation, like energy or food or the arts or governance or whatever it might be, bringing people around those particular issues where they do have a greater stake so that they are more motivated to participate, and then aggregating what they're learning across those different work groups and feeding it up into the regional sustainability plan. This is a way to get people motivated, I think, bring them into the process. They bring their resources, they bring their expertise to the process, and it can really enhance the capacity of the regional organization, which in some of these cases is pretty limited. In some cases, it's an MPO with lots of resources and lots of staff. In some cases, for example, in St. Cloud, they have no staff. They're relying on volunteer efforts, some grant funding that's funding minor consultant roles and some contributions from local governments. So I think it's an interesting way to organize things. St. Cloud actually did organize groups around these particular best practices, and it was a really effective way to get people interested. They had a struggle when they had broader public meetings related to the regional sustainability plan because people didn't really have a stake, but they came to the specific work group meetings. One of the things that we're also seeing is efforts to engage people online. Again, it's hard to get people to show up for a meeting related to something that's at a large scale and over a large time period or far into the future. Online participation makes it more accessible, it's simple, it's something you can do quickly on your own time. One of the things that we see in some of these participation efforts is it's not just an effort to collect information from people, gain their perspectives, but there's also some knowledge building efforts that are built in. So some educational pieces, some sort of exploration of regional issues that happens in these online participation efforts. It makes participation efficient in a way. There's efforts to engage decision makers from local jurisdictions. Regional entities are challenged by how do we engage local jurisdictions who might be affected in different ways by the regional plan. And concerted efforts in some of these cases to reach out to local elected officials, staff in local jurisdictions that might be affected by the plan. Delaware Valley Regional Planning Commission held meetings in each of the districts, I think, or actually each of the counties that was under their jurisdiction, and that was an important way to show that they were reaching out to those particular places. Just putting plan information online, putting background information online, ensuring that everything about this plan and this process is easily accessible. Websites, it's just an expectation these days, I think, to have a really nice website to really engage people and make information accessible. A couple of examples from the cases that we looked at. Dr. Cog, their MetroVision 2035, was an update to their regional plan, their sort of traditional Metropolitan Planning Organization plan. Here, the MPO represents 9 counties. It's, if you know the Denver area, it's very urban to quite rural. What they did in this case is they felt some pressure and they were motivated to introduce sustainability into a plan that was actually pretty new. So they decided to do this update, integrating sustainability, and the initiative to integrate sustainability was to some extent influenced by some stakeholders, but also internally within the Council of Governments. The staff, but also some of the elected officials that serve on their council, saw sustainability as something that they felt they really needed to address and was under-addressed in the previous update of the plan. So they went through an effort to think about how to integrate sustainability into this sort of traditionally organized Metropolitan Planning Organization regional plan. One of the things that's unique about Dr. Cog is that, while again they're limited in the amount of authority that they have as a regional organization, they created the Mile High Compact, which some of you may have heard about before. It's just an interesting example where they get people to sign on to the idea that they'll assist with implementation of this document. It's not a binding document, but just the act of sort of formally signing it at the local level. I think usually it would be done through discussions at a city council level, and there might be some discussion and then a decision to sign off on it. While they're not held to it, I think just the act of signing on shows some support and sort of commitment to actually doing it. One of the things that they did, I think they did an interesting job of engaging stakeholders, and I think sort of over and above what we saw in some of the other cases. They pursued early on in the process, when they were just starting to think about how sustainability fit into their regional plan, having regional conversations about sustainability. And they organized this series of events called Sustainability Cafes. So these were large scale, I think they were held on Saturdays, sort of longer meetings to engage people in early dialogue and conversation about what sustainability meant in that region. It's a way to pull in stakeholders, the general public, elected officials, broader kind of discussions about sustainability. So they explored questions about what would a sustainable Denver region look like? What principles should guide Dr. Cog's policy and funding decisions to support a sustainable region? What indicators should we use to measure progress? So early in the process, again, as I talked about before, taking the time to define sustainability and think about how it's relevant in this particular context in Denver. In terms of participation, Chicago CMAP, Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, just a bit of context, this is the first regional comprehensive plan for Chicago. They function as the MPO, but they saw this as something broader, something bigger, a comprehensive plan for the region. It included a focus on natural systems, which you didn't see in a lot of these other plans, so it added that to your sort of traditional MPO regional plan. It has a very strong implementation framework, and I'm going to talk about that in a minute, but I want to focus initially on the extensive participation and outreach that they did, and the key aspect of it was online. So some of you have maybe seen this before. MetroQuest is a consulting firm. I think they're out of Canada, but they develop these great participatory websites where people can learn about regional issues and then at the same time provide their feedback. So this is a screenshot of one of the websites. So what you're seeing here on the left is you can make a number of choices in key areas, like what's the density of development that you prefer? Where do you want to see development? What's the road network? Or how should the road network function? Transit system, transportation policy, resource policy. So under density, you can choose low density growth, current patterns of growth, moderately compact, highly compact. Transportation policy. Do we want to favor driving, maintain the current mix, support alternatives, strongly favor alternatives, for example? Resource policy. Reduce programs, maintain, expand, or maximize. And then you can indicate your choices in each of the areas, and then you can see how that performs on a variety of indicators that are listed on the right. So I clicked a few of these, as you can see over here. So I picked sort of, what do we do if we do the best things? We have highly compact, we focus development in centers, we have a moderate increase in road network, we significantly increase transit. What do we get? You have outcomes on the right and a little slider bar that adjusts depending on your choices. So then you can actually go back and say, well, what if we do drop that road network down to minimum maintenance? How does it affect some of those sliders? So you can sort of learn about the impacts of particular choices that they might make at the regional scale, and you can produce a map that shows essentially how much sprawl you're going to get if you do this. So it's a simple way for people to sort of play around in a scenario. It's pretty accessible. I think you could easily use this. You're limited to only 6 choices, but you get a good amount of information with just a little bit of playing around on the website. And then you can compare scenarios, and then you can share your scenario at the end. So you can you can produce your preferred scenario and then submit it, and that's tracked by CMAP. So I think an interesting little tool. So this was available online on a website linked through the plan website, but they also had kiosks around town or around the region in high traffic places. So people might come across a kiosk and they could view the website in something that was interactive within a short period of time, hopefully with the intent of making it accessible to a broader set of folks and to engage people who might not otherwise be there. So in terms of implementation, a few key findings, and then I'll highlight again some interesting insights from specific cases. One is just include clear implementation content in the plan. I think this is just good practice anyway. This is how we teach folks to do planning. Just having specific responsibilities, having specific timelines, having specific tasks in the plan as a way to ensure that implementation is going to happen. Look beyond regional authority to help facilitate implementation. Again, regions are often quite limited in the authority that they have, and thinking strategically about how you can engage other organizations, whether they be state regulatory agencies or local governments or nonprofit organizations who might be able to contribute to advancing some of the content that's actually in the regional sustainability plan. One of the things that happened in Chicago is they provided grants to support implementation. So they're quite specific, and I'll show you an example in a minute, in their plan about particular tasks that need to happen. They identify particular organizations, including specific local governments who can help with implementation, and they provide grants to support implementation, whether it be to support staff or infrastructure costs, whatever it might be. Providing toolkits, kind of quite specific strategies about how you might go about implementing a particular aspect of a plan. Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning also provides a lot of technical assistance. Delaware Valley does this as well. In many cases, local governments have significantly less staff. They have significantly less resources. So the regional agency can provide mapping support, policy support, assistance related to public engagement to assist what might be happening at the local level. Another thing that we heard from a lot of folks is start small. Try to get some quick outcomes out of your regional plan to continue the momentum. Ensure that you're reaching out to media to make sure those successes and outcomes are visible. It's really important early on. And then another thing that we're seeing out of some of these regions is identifying and tracking regional indicators. So we've heard a lot about sustainability indicators. City of Minneapolis has a set of indicators. There are other cities and regions around the country that have indicators as well. What we're seeing come out of these regional sustainability planning processes is that they're identifying indicators as a means of tracking plan performance. So they're linking indicators specifically to the content in the plan so that you can see performance over time, or lack of performance maybe. And often these are being displayed as online tools. Delaware Valley, which I don't have a slide for, has a report that they publish that's sort of like a scorecard, but some of the other ones are a little bit more advanced or enhanced, you might say. So first, a little bit on implementation. This is just an example from Chicago. One of the things that they do is have detailed tables related to implementation for each of their key topics. So this is Implementation Action Area 1, implementing energy and water retrofit programs. So they have specific strategies. Develop a framework for retrofit program administration. Who's going to be the lead on that? It's the regional agency, it's the city of Chicago, and it's the city of Rockford. They're going to implement the Chicago Region Ramp-Up Program, which was funded in April at a level of $25 million. They're going to provide a financial framework for retrofit programs. It's the state, it's the municipalities, it's utilities, it's lending institutions. So again, identifying not just what the regional organization can do or the regional agency, but other entities who have resources, who have expertise, who can help ensure that implementation actually happens. And if they're engaged in the process as it goes along, it's even easier. So in terms of measuring regional sustainability, again, a few of these regional plans are connecting to sustainability indicators. One of the sort of benefits that we're hearing about these is it helps build knowledge. It helps kind of simply express the idea of sustainability through a number of measures, things that people can identify with. You can also help understand local impacts on the region. A lot of these indicator systems will present information at a local scale and then aggregate it also at a regional scale. In some cases, this is new data that's being aggregated at a regional scale, which is really a value added to communities who might not have access to that data. And it can help track performance related to plan goals. So this, again, is from Chicago. This is their MetroPulse website. And they have indicators in a number of areas. So health, culture, economy, environment, housing, civic involvement, education, transportation, land use, safety, and coordinated planning. And so you can have a little snapshot here, and then you can pick any one of these. So I picked transportation because we're here with the CTS event. So they have a number of indicators, and what we have here is passenger trips per person per day in the region. These are just a sample at the bottom, so quite a diverse range of indicators. Road condition, travel time index, percent population obese, percent of regional trails complete, pedestrian environment factor, which is sort of an aggregated factor where they're looking at multiple contributors to pedestrian environment, percentage of transit vehicles, an ADA compliant, bridge condition rating, schools with safe routes to school programs. So a wide range of things sort of fitting in under transportation and data being collected and analyzed and displayed at a regional scale. So as you can see, there's a little the gray bar at the top. You choose your topic first, and I chose transportation. Then you can choose your indicator. There's a drop-down box and has many, many indicators. Again, I picked transit passenger trips per person, per capita. Then you can choose your data set. I picked passenger trips per person per day. And then you can choose your geography. So in this case, I'm displaying it at the regional scale. For most of these indicators, you can also display it at the county level. So you can break it out. You can also display it for different time periods, and that's what the green and blue and gray boxes at the bottom are. And here, in this case, you only have a few periods to choose from, but you can see different ways that you can display the data. So an important tool for communities that may not have access to this data, may not have staff to actually use it and display it in a way that's meaningful. This is just another one. Here I'm presenting data at the county level, and they just have one period here. This is ride quality by percent of route miles for interstate freeway with functional class 1, sort of complicated, but road condition, essentially. So again, you choose your topic, you choose your indicator, your data set, and then your geography. So I think a really useful tool and pretty accessible. And then on the side over here in the black box, it has some background on the indicators. So some of these are pretty complex. If you think about pedestrian environment factor that I mentioned before, this is a whole new indicator that's being calculated at the regional level. So it talks more about how it's actually measured. So it lends some legitimacy to the measure that might not exist in something more simple. This is an example from Victoria, British Columbia. They have their regional sustainability strategy and a number of indicators tracked in key areas. So they have 3 basic areas: natural systems, social resilience, again a term that we're not really using in most of the U.S. plans, and then built environment. And under those, indicators in a number of categories. So social resilience, you see things like social well-being, economic sustainability, food security. Built environment is sustainable development, affordable housing, and then transportation, which I picked. And then you can see a number of different areas: transit, travel behavior, and the list goes on. And then below that, you get into the specific indicators. So you can click on a number of things. I picked percentage of all trips as bicycling. And here you can see data over time. They don't have it for 2010. I'm not sure why. but you can see, one, the actual data, the percentage of trips by bike, and then you can see their target. So they're not only presenting data, but they're presenting the level they'd like to be at, their target for the region. So then better connecting to what's showing up in the plan. And so they have indicators in this huge range of areas. So I think just another interesting way of displaying this data at a regional scale. So with that, we're wrapping up right now. We're developing the draft framework for regional sustainability planning and implementation. Hopefully we'll have that finalized this fall. We'll reconvene our advisory group to talk through the draft and hopefully get some great final feedback to ensure that this is as usable as possible. We're just thinking about how it can be used. I think what we're interested in is presenting information at the case level, but then also more broadly this kind of set of best practices around regional sustainability planning and implementation. I think it's useful with looking at the cases. It just helps us sort of think outside of our own box. I think we're very comfortable with how things are working in Minnesota, but I think what this does is sort of opens our eyes to what's happening in other locations. I think there are a lot of interesting models and ways to think about sustainability and think about how it can be integrated into a variety of different kinds of plans at the regional scale and more broadly as well. So I think as we think about just sort of speculating about how it might fit into the Twin Cities context, I think there's potential that it could fit into the Corridors of Opportunity program, which is funded by HUD and the Living Cities grant. I think there's potentially a connection to the Regional Development Framework as that's updated in the next few years. And I think potentially an interest to begin measuring sustainability at a regional scale, thinking about the utility of metrics or indicators at a regional scale, what they might offer to the region, decision makers, organizations, as well as local governments who might benefit from having access to better data aggregated at a regional scale. So I think a number of opportunities. We're excited to be able to finish this up, and I've presented this a few times, and we're still getting close to finishing it up, and we really will finish it by the end of this year and hopefully get it out. And I think we really see it as a great resource for this new set of regions that's now funded to do regional sustainability planning, to get that out to them to sort of learn about these regions that have actually done this before this new set has taken on this task. And we've had a lot of opportunities to present this to folks. So it's been an exciting project. So hopefully we can continue work in this area. And I think that's it. So thank you.
Joe has the microphone there. I don't know if the people online can hear me, but do we also have questions coming up online? Okay. So we will start. If anybody here has a question, those of you who got here late need to use the microphone so it will go on the webinar, even though it doesn't project here in the room. No questions?
I noticed a few. Can you hear it?
Yes.
I noticed a few of those. They were kind of non-official organizations that develop plans. Is there any thought that was that just their planning structure, or they were groups formed around sustainability that is because they're non-official they had a better chance at getting a plan through in the United States? Or
in each of the cases that we looked at, it was a pre-existing regional organization, and they decided to either add sustainability to an existing planning document or sort of planning approach that they had, or they decided to sort of do a full-scale sort of new regional plan. St. Cloud, for example, they did a plan maybe 10 years ago for the region, didn't include sustainability at all. It was sort of their first plan as this new regional entity emerged there. They don't have staff. They've never had staff. They had some funding, I think, from the state to hire a consultant to do their plan. There was a group that emerged there and just said, I think sustainability might be something that we should pursue as a region. So they engaged a few people. I think it actually started at a coffee meeting among some business leaders. This is what we heard in downtown St. Cloud, who met every week. And they said, you know, we really need to be thinking about sustainability and how can we fit it into this region, and saw the regional district as a way to do that, sort of a vehicle to organize people at a regional scale around this topic. So then they connected with St. Cloud, which had a local sustainability coordinator. They offered to provide a little bit of support and expertise in helping develop the plan. They got a bit of grant funding that allowed them to hire a couple of consultants, and it just sort of emerged organically. But within kind of the bounds of this regional entity that exists on paper but essentially doesn't have any staff. Long Island is another one that it was a pre-existing regional organization. They had a regional plan in the past, but this was an update and sort of a refocusing around a sustainable strategies plan. They saw sustainability as a way of kind of getting at some of the real challenges that they were having at the regional level that they just felt like weren't being addressed at all in the past, and saw sustainability as a way to tackle them in a way that hadn't been done before. There was quite a lot of pushback around using sustainability as the means to do that, and lots of politics. And as I said, they've been defunded by one of the counties, and since the other county took away their funding, the other county fell out too. But that's been a challenge, but not fully driven by the sustainability aspect of it. And then in the MPOs, I mean, those are existing organizations that have staff and authority that's established at the federal level. So it varies, I think. Does that answer it? Okay.
Well, this is not a very well-planned question, but in our region we have a number of different organizations, agencies, watershed districts, conservation things, that we have a number of different entities that are already tasked with sustainability in their niche or segment of the range of issues. So, you know, can we somehow focus our further efforts on maybe integrating those with other areas that don't have a focus? You know, like, I don't know what, I can't think of an example, but of what's missing, but I can think of examples where we have very well established, maybe even entrenched organizations, and so to kind of even things out a little bit is the gist of my thought.
Yeah, I mean, my personal perspective, sort of informed by, you know, broader work I've done and informed by what I've learned here, is that what sustainability calls us to do is figure out how to think across those systems and connect those entrenched or otherwise organizations. So we have a great watershed planning set of organizations, and they're organized around watersheds. They do fantastic work in that watershed. But should we be thinking about water quality and watershed issues at the same time that we're thinking about land use, and maybe at the same time that we're thinking about transportation, and then at the same time we're thinking about housing? And what's the means to actually facilitate that discussion about those connections? Is there an entity to do that? There may or may not be. Is there a way to have that happen in some other way? I guess that's the question I see for this region, is how do we better connect all of the great stuff that's already happening? Because to me, that's what sustainability requires. You can't just do a sustainable transportation plan that doesn't account for the broader set of impacts on health and housing and land use and environment and energy and climate change and food and all of that. But then how do you also make it manageable and not too political and all of that, and have enough money to do it and all of that? So acknowledging the challenges, to me, that's what sustainability calls us to do, is acknowledge those connections and think across systems, and think across geography, and think across time, and think across discipline and all that. So, others?
Which of the plans were you most impressed with? If we were to go out and read one of the plans, which one?
I like the Chicago overall. I think just because, to me, I mean, I think they were at an interesting time because they had an MPO in the past, but it sort of morphed into this Chicago Metropolitan Agency for Planning, which was seen as this new new regional entity that went beyond just kind of the role that an MPO would play, and they had this opportunity to do the first regional plan for Chicago. Well, maybe you would say it's the second if you think back in time to the sort of original regional plan. And I think there was some excitement around that and really some recognition that this was a new opportunity to do something maybe different. They also had a lot of resources. They had some foundation resources as well as their own kind of staff and financial resources as an agency. I think they do a good job of integrating natural resources, which is a piece that I would say is missing from some of the other plans, especially if you're thinking broadly about sustainability. I like that they have a really strong implementation section that reaches beyond the regional entity and I think in a way recognizes the limits of what regional agencies can do and sort of draws on the resources of other jurisdictions, et cetera. And then the indicators, I think, are just a really effective way of communicating with the public, with stakeholders, and sort of expressing the future and the life of this plan beyond just preparing the document. So I like that one a lot, if you can't tell. But I think there's good things in all of them. I like Long Island because it's different, and they organized around strategies, they brought in issues, and I think they were very strategic in identifying the issues that they had to focus on first, which I think is really an interesting way of thinking about sustainability. So I like those.
You may have the same answer to this question.
Okay.
Maybe the same question, but I'll try and be a little more directed, which is, did you find, you've discussed sort of best practices in outreach and participation and so forth, but what did you find in terms of examples of the best, if you will, collection of diverse stakeholders buying into the process and participating throughout, and did you then find that that had an impact in greater implementation and measurement?
Well, I think Long Island did a good job, but they obviously didn't get to the implementation and measurement because they are going away, essentially, as far as we know right now. But I liked the way that they engaged people around sort of topics. So education was one of their big issues. And what I heard from folks, and I talked to a variety of people from organizations like Sustainable Long Island and Erase Racism, which is an organization focused on social equity issues in that area, and a number of other nonprofits. And what they talked about is it brought people to the table who would not otherwise be there. So in the education topic group, they had people from the unions, and they had teachers, and they had administrators, and they had parents all at the table for the first time talking about education and how it related to sustainability and a bigger set of issues across Long Island. And so that's what I heard from the folks that we talked to, and I think that was really significant. Obviously, implementation is not happening at this time, but perhaps through that engagement, and I haven't tracked this, maybe there are new relationships that are built that can help advance those discussions as things go forward. I think Chicago, I think they do a good job linking plan to implementation and to monitoring, which I think probably sets them up best for implementation. I think they did a good job with online participation. They have a really nice website. It's very accessible. One of the things I didn't mention that they also did is they funded nonprofit organizations or advocacy organizations to do community organizing in particular communities to engage underrepresented groups, which I think is significant. And it's a real challenge with regional planning and, well, planning in general. But I think they reached out to organizations who had capacity and connections in those neighborhoods and with those underrepresented populations to bring them in. So I think that's an interesting approach as well, but resource intensive, of course.
Carissa, I had a question. Are you planning to do any follow-up or ongoing research on this? It's sort of triggered by what you said about Long Island, that you were very impressed by the plan, but also the whole thing has sort of fallen apart. Mm-hmm. Now that one, because it isn't a governmental entity, it was a voluntary association, and you're probably right that even though the actual structure fell apart, there will be some ongoing individual things that move forward because just of the conversations and discussions. Mm-hmm. But I would be really interested to see, since this concept is so new, does this actually get implemented? Do people continue to do these things on an ongoing basis, or is it just sort of the latest plan du jour that right now we're interested in sustainability and 5 years from now it'll be something else?
Yeah, I don't have funding to do a follow-up study to track implementation over time. I think that's the challenge with planning in general, is we often have money to study plans or planning processes, but we don't often study implementation. I think that would be really interesting to go back and talk to these same folks and say, are people still talking about this? Are you connecting with the people that you connected with in this process now? Have things changed? How do you see kind of the conversation around sustainability changed? I think it'd be really interesting to have that. I mean, I guess we could do St. Cloud. It's easy and cheap. Yeah.
Whether or not it actually gets implemented.
Yeah. I mean, I think the significance that I'm seeing in kind of taking on sustainability and reorganizing plans around sustainability, I think that's significant. So there are a lot of plans that are out there that people would probably say, oh, this is a sustainable plan, even though it doesn't say sustainability. What these plans are doing that's different is calling out that term. And I think putting it up front, organizing kind of key goals or the vision statement or the mission around sustainability, putting it in the title, I think that is significant. And I think that's something that distinguishes these plans from some of the other ones. Like we looked at the Portland Metro Plan, which is a great plan. It has lots of great content. But they don't call out sustainability as a key aspect of it. It's not in the title. It's not in the early kind of text that's there. So I think that's what distinguishes these. And to me, it's important.
Question for you, going back to your comments on Chicago. What I thought was interesting on the Chicago plan was, and trying to think how it might work in this region, is that they have some very clear language on education, on workforce, and on good governance and finance reforms, which are clearly beyond the scope of their implementing or their enabling legislation, which tells them that they're transportation and land use agency with some data collection. How do you think that worked for them? I mean, they had some pretty blunt language in there, and it made their plan feel rounded and whole to address those issues. How do you think that went for them? How do you think that could go here?
I can't speak specifically to that content, but I think I agree that it is well rounded, and I think to leave those issues out of a plan that you're calling a sustainability plan, it's lacking if you don't have them in there. I think the way that you can deal with it is realize that the regional agency can't do everything, and that regional planning involves not just the regional entity, but the broader set of organizations and communities that make up the region. And maybe, I guess, the challenge we have here is that our region is bigger than our regional entity, so how do we maybe even reach beyond that to address the broader set of issues? I don't know, it's a challenge, I think.
Other state and maybe even federal agencies to get that content in there. So I was just
Right.
it seems
you saw that.
complicated and a little bit political. So I was just curious to know the backstory of this.
Yeah, I mean, I think you saw in that implementation snapshot that I gave you from Chicago, they're referring to state agencies, and they're referring to federal funding in some cases, and the energy one, it was energy or water, and really seeing that these resources and the ideas to get this stuff done actually has to come from outside of the regional body itself. And that's where they get their authority, I think, to do the politically challenging things. Anyone else? All right. Okay. All right.
All right, well, thanks once again to Carissa Schively Slotterback. And this, for your information, this is reserved, or we have secured one AICP credit if you go to the APA website. For those of you that need AICP credits, this does qualify for one, and we have a PDH form for some of the rest of you with continuing education. Our next seminar will be next week on October 13th at the same time, 3:30 p.m. Professor John Evans from the Department of Chemistry and Biochemistry at UMD. He'll talk about detection of road and bridge surface conditions using time domain reflectometry and dielectric relaxation spectroscopy. I'm not going to say that again. So thank you for coming, and I hope to see you next week.